Hello fellow Unreal Engine artists, designers and developers. Today I'll show you how to add tunnels to your spline system. We'll start off by modeling the tunnel meshes, and then I'll show you how to create the spline system in your landscapes, including how to drill holes in your landscape so that your tunnels can go through hills and mountains. Let's get straight into it. Firstly, I just want to say a big thank you to all my viewers. I've just hit the 10,000 subscriber milestone, and it's been great getting all of your feedback in the comments to drive these videos forward. So here's to the next 10,000 subscribers and beyond, and let's get cracking on with this tutorial. So we're going to create tunnels that we can use with our spline wall system today. So the first thing we need to do is to create a tunnel mesh that we can use in our spline wall. So let's go into the modeling mode with Shift 5, and we'll start to create our tunnel segment. So the way I'm going to approach this, we'll do a different approach later on, but the obvious way is to create a cylinder and then cut out a hole with another cylinder. So choose your cylinder, and we're going to set the type to dynamic mesh, because at the moment we're creating the elements to combine, and then we'll convert it to a static mesh at the end. Radius, we want to make that a radius of 400, so that will create a 800 diameter tunnel piece. Height, we'll make 400 as well. That will tie in with our wall systems here. In fact, let's just put it in the middle here so we can see. Radial slices will define how smooth that is. So let's make that 32 so that we make it a bit smoother. The other thing we want to do is we want to apply a material here. You can see I've already applied it. So the brick wall material like I had for the walls before. And then the UV scale, we'll need to kind of eyeball this a bit. If I go in here, I want it to try and match the walls there. So that seems to be a bit bigger. Let's try 25. And that looks almost on par with the walls over here. So let's stick with that UV scale of 25. And let's do accept. And that creates our outer cylinder. Now what I want to do is create an inner cylinder and cut that out. So let's choose the cylinder tool again. By the way, I've got snap of 100 up here. That'll make it easy to line up the cylinders when we need to cut them. So let's create the other cylinder over here, and we'll reduce the radius by 50. That'll be the depth of our walls. And let's just make it slightly bigger, just so it's obvious when we cut through it. Keep the radial slices the same. In fact, keep everything else the same here. We're still a dynamic mesh, and do accept. And then we will move this into place. Might need to just move around a bit to see. So I want it in the center there. So with the snap on, it's nice and easy. You can see that that is now centered in that other cylinder. And now we want to do a Boolean operation to subtract the inner cylinder. So go to the mesh Boolean operation, if I can find it. So yeah, so it's here. We need to select two items though. So we've got the inner one selected. Shift and select the other one. Now mesh Boolean, and then make sure it's the right difference. You can see here that if it's difference A minus B, it's the other way around. Difference B minus A, and we're cutting the inner out of the outer cylinder. So that's looking good. Let's do accept here. So now we have our full hollow cylinder. What we want to do is cut it in half, and we can use the plane cut to do that. So if you go into the try model section and choose plane cut, we can now cut it in half. At the moment it's cutting it in half up and down. So just rotate this round again. I've got snap on 10 degrees, so I can just move it up until it gets to 90, and we have a nice half cylinder, which once we rotate it will become our tunnel segment. So click accept there, go to the rotate tool, rotate it by 90 degrees, like so. So that's all looking pretty good so far. Let's, before we do the final conversion, let's bake the rotation in here so that the rotation is as we're seeing on screen. So if you go down to the transform section, we can do bake, rotation and scale. So bake, rotation. So apply that. Now, is that everything we need to do? I think it is. I think we can now do the conversion to the static mesh. So finish off with a convert. So again, in the transform section, convert, static mesh, accept. That all looks good. And Control B to take us to our model here. It looks right in there. So let's do an F2 and rename it to tunnel. Okay, that all looks pretty good. So let's try and use this in our spline wall system now. So we'll delete our model here. We don't need to see it anymore there. We'll come back out with Shift 1 into the main system, or main level, I should say. And let's put in a spline wall. So come back out here, go to our tools, drag a spline wall in here. Let's set the wall mesh to tunnel. Our newly created piece, and we have a tunnel piece there, so that's looking good. And then let's just select this spline point. We'll move it around a bit. We'll extend it out, and then we'll create a new one. So I'll use Alt to create a new piece there, and let's just move that around a bit. And it's kind of looking good. So I could create a long tunnel there, but I just want to create a quick short tunnel just for just to test it out. Now, right angles are going to be a problem with tunnels because now we're dealing with width. You're going to get cut throughs if you have very sharp points. That's something that I won't address in this tutorial, but we might need to look at it in future tutorials about how you create sort of edge pieces. And we can, as we've always done before, we can scale the edge there. Now, I'm wondering if I've created enough segments, subdivisions along here, because it does look quite angular. You remember we had this problem when we first did our walls. So let's just have a quick look at wireframe. Yeah, and you can see that along the segments here, we've only got one subdivision. So we really need to have multiple subdivisions in here. So when you create this, we ought to create multiple subdivisions. However, we're going to create another version of the wall mesh in a minute, so we won't worry about that for now, but just be aware that's why it is angular at the moment. We don't have enough geometry there. Let's go back to lit mode, and let's just have a quick look at it from the angle of player. If I go into play mode, you can see that apart from it being sort of very straight, it acts like a tunnel in game, so that's good. And let's have a look at the UVs on this. So the wall on the side looks pretty good. Now, what if we wanted the bricks to be laid out in a flat approach? Now we can do that with the UV tools. I'll show you quickly how to do that. Let's go back to our models. Let's bring in our tunnel segment here just so we can see it. And let's say we want the outer wall here to be rotated by 90 degrees. Well, we have the ability to do that in the modeling tools. If you do Shift 5 to go back into modeling, down in the UV section, we've got the transform UV area, and it shows you UV islands on here. So what we can do is we can select a UV island and then do a rotation. You don't do rotation in X or Y because we only have, it's a flat plane, the UV, so you only have one rotation plane. So let's rotate by 90, and you can see that now we have the bricks the right way round, and we have another island over here. So select that, also 90, and again we've got that by 90 degrees. So if we commit that, accept, you can see that our tunnel over here now has horizontal bricks. But there's a problem with this tunnel mesh that I don't really like. If you look at the edges, the bricks are vertical, and even if we rotate them 90 degrees and make them horizontal, it's not how walls, curved walls, are actually built. They're built by making the bricks follow around in an arch, and that's pretty difficult to transform the UV to do that. So let's take a different modeling approach to this tunnel piece in order to get a nice UV that has the bricks going round the edge of the arch. So now we're going to take a different approach to modeling our tunnel wall piece, and we're going to create something like a floor segment, and then we're going to bend it into a tunnel shape. So I've come back into the modeling section. I'm going to start off with a box, and again we'll do dynamic mesh for the moment, although we probably could do static mesh because we're not doing any boolean. So yeah, let's do static mesh. So the width of the, actually let's put it on here so we can see as we go. So down here, width is 400, depth 400, height of 50. Now we'll make sure we get the subdivisions right this time so we don't get that jagged area here. So we're going to do width subdivisions of 32, depth subdivisions of 16, and 1 for the height. Let's we've got brick here. Let's change our UV scale down to 1. No, that's not right. 5 looks right. And let's think now about those width and depths we've created. So if you remember from your school maths, if we bend this around, the circumference of a circle is 2 pi r. We want to create half that circle, so that would be pi times the radius. Well, we know that the radius here is 400. We made it a diameter of 800. So it's roughly 400 times 3 that we want for our plane, so that we can then warp it around and create the same half circumference here. So let's change our width here to 1200. So that is, I haven't done pi exactly, that's roughly right. And we now need to adjust our UV scale again. So let's make this 15, and let's get a bit closer to make sure that looks about right. Yeah, that looks about right there. And let's just lift it up so we can see the effect once we've warped it. So I'm going to just lift it up here a bit so we can see when we warp. So now we've got our plane created here. Let's go into the deform section and select the warp tool, and you can see that it's deforming the mesh, but it's deforming it on the wrong axis. So if you come over here, we want to deform it on this blue axis here. So if you drag this until you get that deformed by 90 degrees, you can see it's now in the right direction, but we want it to warp down rather than up. So let's change this minus 90 to a 90. Now it's angling down, but it's not warping enough. So go over to the bend degrees here and change the bend degrees from 90 to 180. And you see now we have exactly what we want. And the reason why I've taken this approach is if you look at the bricks here now, the bricks are actually now following the contour of the archway. So that's exactly how you'd expect them to be built. So let's click accept on this, and that's looking pretty good. The thing I'm noticing is that the pivot point, because we started with the plane here, the pivot point's higher than we want it down at the bottom middle. We can change that. So go down to pivot, which is, if I remember rightly, in the transform section. So click on pivot and change the pivot to bottom. Okay, so now we have that in the bottom middle of there. So apart from the fact that it's been modeled differently, everything else is looking good. So click accept. Do we have the brick walls on the side horizontal? We do already, so we don't need to rotate those around. So that's looking pretty good. So let's go into the content browser with Control B, and we'll rename this one Tunnel Warp. And now what we'll do is we will delete this model here, and let's change in our spline wall, let's change the mesh. So we've got tunnel at the moment, let's change it to tunnel warp. And you can see that we now have a better UV on the edges here. And we can just stretch this out a bit more. Let's take this one here, move it out. And you can see that it's a much smoother looking, and we don't have that problem now with the jagged edges because we've created more segments here for it to deform the mesh. So that's looking pretty good. What I'm going to show you next is how to use this in your landscape. So we'll use it with our deform tools, and I'll also show you how you can cut holes through the landscape if you want your tunnels to go through mountains or to go underneath the landscape. So let's get on and do that. So I've switched over to a landscape layer and created a simple tunnel system using our new tunnel warp mesh. So you can see here it's a spline with 4 points on it. And we can use all of the tools we created earlier. So the deform landscape we can create here. We can use deform landscape, and we can select spline points, and we can move them down into the ground or above the ground, and you can see that the landscape is deforming to cater for that. And if we go into play mode, you can see that this tunnel is able to be run through the deformed landscape. But what if we want to cut through things in the landscape? So whether we want to go under something or whether we want to go through a mountain. Let's have a look at that now. Now I've created a small hill in our landscape, and I want my tunnel to go through the hill. And the problem we've got is that the landscape gets in the way. So if I'm in play mode and I try to go through the tunnel, well, I can't because the landscape's there. So it would be great if we had a way of drilling holes in the landscape. And fortunately, Unreal Engine provides for that. It has a visibility mask for the landscape, which allows you to paint holes in the landscape. So if you go into landscape mode, and in the sculpt section, you see there's this tool called visibility. And it has this visibility layer which acts as a mask, and you can paint and remove holes on the landscape. So make your brush size very small. I've made mine 100 here. And if you go into the area you want to draw the hole and you start painting, you can see that it's creating holes. Now, it isn't completely detailed. You'll see that it depends on your landscape size and the landscape sort of components. But usually you can create the hole you want in the landscape. And you can just keep sort of maneuvering around to see it. If you go too far with your cutting, so let's have a look. I'll deliberately cut. Yeah, you can see a little hole here. All you do is use the shift key and that recovers that area. So paint on to create holes, use shift to remove the holes there. And let's do the same on the other side. So let's come down here and let's create a little area here. And again, let's check to see, actually need a bit more at the top there. And let's check if we've gone too far. Yeah. So shift, and we'll just fill in the gaps there. Okay, so we've created our hole. Let's go into play mode. Oh, I should have said one thing first. If you're painting this these holes and nothing's changing on your landscape, it's because your material, your landscape material, doesn't have the visibility mask plugged in. So if I open up the landscape material I've got here, all you need to make sure is that in your material output or your material attributes, add an opacity mask and then do a landscape visibility mask node and plug that in. And that will then do the output from that paint layer into the opacity. So that's all you need to add into your landscape if it doesn't have it already. A lot of landscape materials already have this set up. So let's go into play mode here and go into our tunnel. Now we can go through the hole, but we fall into the sky. That's because we obviously don't have a floor. Now we've got rid of the landscape there, we don't have anything supporting us. So what we need to do is, if we know we're going to use tunnel segments to go underground or burrow through mountains, we need to update our mesh to have a floor. So let's do that. Okay, so we're back in modeling mode. Let's find our meshes again and let's drag our tunnel warp piece into here, and we want to add a base to it. So let's go to our box section and we'll create a new dynamic mesh here. And let's put it in here first of all. So I've got the snap set on, so let's put it roughly in the middle here. I need to move it slightly. Actually, we'll do that afterwards. So let's set our different dimensions here. So we want the width to be 800. So I've made it 800 and I've made sure it's centered here. Depth, we obviously want to make 400 because that was our depth here. So let's make sure that lines up here. Start and end. Yep, that looks good. Might have to adjust the UV scale, but I'll let you do that if you want it to match exactly here. Now, in terms of height, well, we can do whatever height we want here. We could make it a thinner mesh at the bottom there, so that's fine. I'll make that 25. Width subdivisions, we don't need to worry about because we're not going to be deforming the width, so let's make that 1. Depth subdivisions, we want to make that the same as the wall, which we made 16 before. So that means that the floor will also curve around. So let's leave that at 16. Everything else looks right. We've got the brick material on here. Okay, that looks good. So let's accept that. So now we have two meshes. We want to combine them together. So select the first one and the second one, and you can do a merge. So here we have create merge multiple meshes to create new objects. So click on that. So we're going to write to a new object, combined, and the output type is, let's say, we don't want it from input because we don't want to change our original one. Output is a static mesh. So let's click accept. Okay, now we have our merged mesh. And if we do Control B, we can now rename this to tunnel, oops, caps lock off, tunnel underscore floor. Okay, so now we have a new segment that we can use if we want to burrow through the landscape. And all we need to do now is go back to our spline here and we'll change the mesh that we're using to tunnel floor. Okay, now we have the floor there. And now we can see that we may need to cut some extra holes in our landscape. It depends how you want to do it, really. Let's clean this up a bit. So I'm going to go back into landscape mode and paint a bit more invisibility here. Yeah, something like that. And then let's go into play mode. And now we should be able to run through our tunnel. So we're now underneath the landscape hill. Everything's looking good, and we're back in the landscape on the other side. So yeah, some fine tuning required here to fill in the holes and to move the landscape round. But broadly speaking, this is the approach for creating the tunnel systems that go through your landscape. So hope you found today's tutorial useful. Again, thank you for subscribing. It's a great feeling to get to the 10,000 subscriber mark. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.